This might be a silly question, but when you say the total gift of yourself to another, like, in the context of marriage, when someone just say, does that mean that you can't give yourself to God as much? Like, how do you describe that kind of relationship if you're giving yourself totally to God and also giving yourself totally to your spouse? Like, is there some kind of thing that...
No, there's giving yourself totally to your spouse is a way of giving yourself to God. It's a way of giving witness to God's love for us, to instantiating God's love for us in this world. And so in that way, there is no choice between God's love and the love of your spouse. They go together.
Yeah.
And if it's a real love for your spouse, you'll want to see your spouse in love with God. So you'll want to see that your love for them helps them flourish. And the nature of love, the gift of love, is to assist the other to flourish. So you're assisting them in their development and their orientation towards God. So the whole focus of being a gift of love is to focus both of you towards God. When you think about the two main vocations, of celibate vocation and marital vocation, they are both a gift of self to God, but in different ways. The marital relationship is a relationship of this world, of this human existence. The celibate relationship is a relationship to God, and it's meant to be a witness to the life to come. It's meant to be the witness to a life where there is no husband and wife. And so the presence of a celibate in the world calls to our attention the fact that at the end of the day we're alone with God, we're in communion with God, and God is enough for us. And so that they both go together. Yeah.
You touched on this briefly before, but how would you explain and defend the Church's position on marriage and the uniqueness of it between a man and a woman to someone who perhaps sees marriage in a secular fashion, who doesn't believe in God? And how would you support, how would you argue support for state laws that protect marriage being between a man and a woman?
I said earlier that what makes a marriage actually a loving relationship is that it's fruitful, that is, it gives out to others, to community. That's an important function for the state, for the sake of children, but it's also just in the fruitfulness of the relationship in general. But particularly for the sake of children, a state has an interest in this fundamental block or unit of the society. So the function of the state in passing laws in relation to marriage is to protect that institution, protect that gift of self, and to give the respect of the state towards that relationship as a relationship where these two people are given to each other completely, and done so in a fruitful way. And so, yeah, that's the basic reason why there would be an interest in it. It's kind of got really interesting the way things have developed, where the concept of marriage that the state is using has more and more become a contract and not a covenant, and a contract that you can leave, and a contract that more and more there's a desire to take sexuality out of marriage. If you look at the proposals for legislation, for instance, in relation to reproductive technology, where the concept of marriage has been removed, largely by judicial decision, but it's likely to be removed in state law as well in Victoria, so that anybody can access reproductive technology in order to have a child, and anybody can become a parent whether or not they're in a sexual relationship with other people. So basically, under the proposals that are there at the moment, you can have, you basically privatise adoption, so that when a woman gives birth to a child, she can declare anybody to be a parent of that child, anybody of any gender. So she could have 30 people as a parent of the child if she wants to, and have them put onto the birth certificate as parents of that child. So that what's happened there is that the idea of a child originating in the love of a couple and being a symbol and a witness and an ongoing embodiment of their relationship to each other has gone out of the state idea of marriage. So what we've got in state law in terms of marriage is what's becoming less and less marriage and more just a fragment of what marriage was. And so the question for us is, in our relationship and community, is how much we try to defend and protect protect a rich and full concept of marriage as a covenant, and that complete gift of one person to another, orientated towards having children and so on. All those aspects are being stripped away from marriage. It's being treated as something totally separate from whether or not somebody has a child by somebody else.
Do you think that perhaps the idea of marriage within the state is drifting to an extent that will, in the end, have a concept of church marriage and a concept of just whatever the state says?
Many countries do that. If you get married in Germany, for instance, you have a state celebration, and when you've done the state celebration, then you go and get married in the church. So it's, the church and state have remained separate. In Australia, we've had this situation where the priests are also civil celebrants, and that these two events go together. In fact, most priests, when they marry a couple, they actually do the formal paperwork for the state beforehand, and then they do the church thing on the day. So in fact, in effect, the legal part of it's been done before the actual day, apart from the actual taking of vows. But so I wouldn't be threatened by the idea of totally separating church marriage and state marriage, although I'd want to protect it as long as possible, because I think it's a good thing for church marriages that the state protects them. And what we're talking about is a situation where the state would no longer really give protection to church marriages and not regard them with the same meaning. But we're getting to a point where the meaning of marriage is so distorted, or state marriage or legal marriage, that it has little relevance to what happens when two people get married within a religion. It's got quite complex. Okay. Yeah.
Just a question on that of state. Given the state, say, ideal society, well, a normal society where a state would respect the true idea of marriage, as you've explained, would it then follow that the state would have the right to punish, or in some way, whether it be financially or other, those who violated the true state of marriage?
Well, that used to be the case. It used to be the case that marriages were enforceable at law, but I mean, since Henry VIII, that's pretty much gone by the board with the allowance of divorce. But what we're seeing now is not just allowing divorce and so doing away with the permanence of marriage, but we're also seeing the fragmenting of marriage in all sorts of other ways, removing it from having any meaning in relation to sexuality, removing it from being necessary or having any relationship to whether or not you have children, removing it from being the point of security for the identity of a child. All of those things are being shifted on because parenthood has become, or is becoming, under the proposals before the State Parliament at the moment, is becoming an optional, privatised notion, so that anybody can declare a parent whether they have a relationship with that person or not. It's kind of got really distorted. Yeah.
You touched on before, the importance of marriage to society and its place in society. Just wondering if you can offer any other, secular argument. Don't like to use that, but arguments that you can use in the workplace and at university and so forth as to why the concept of same-sex marriage is flawed and why it won't work.
Same-sex marriages. It's difficult. It's a difficult area because you run right up against when you move into say anything in this area, you can be accused of being intolerant of people who have same-sex attraction.
But you can address the issue of marriage without necessarily appearing to be
critical. You can address marriage in terms of the biblical concept of marriage and why it exists. As I said before, the state has an interest in marriage largely because marriage is the fundamental unit of the society and is fruitful and provides that base and security for children. I'm not sure how much interest the state would have in marriage if marriages didn't produce children. It's because they produce children that it matters. Same-sex relationships don't in themselves produce children. They can have children by all sorts of technology, but that's not as a result of their relationship. That's basically something that any single person can do. So basically when they have the reproductive technology, they do so virtually as a single person. And that's what's happening in Victoria at the moment, is that is that reproductive technology is made available to single people, and so gay people avail themselves of it as single people. They go without a spouse, so to speak. So, yes, it's hard to see what role the state would have in marriage if marriage weren't primarily about the origin of a child. And what we're seeing is fragmentation not only in the area of extending the concept of marriage to two people who don't have a kind of relationship that's complementary and able to be fruitful in that way, and the fragmentation in the other direction where we're having children and parent-child relationships that have got nothing to do with marriage or sexuality. Yeah.